Puji syukur kita panjatkan kehadirat Tuhan Yang Maha Esa, Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, karena hanya berkat karunia-Nya kita masih diberikan kesempatan dan dapat berkegiatan hingga hari ini. Perkenalkan, nama saya Galun Nurpinda dari Direktorat Pengembangan UMKM dan Koperasi BAPPENAS akan memandu jalannya acara webinar pada hari ini. Bapak Ibu yang terhormat, pertama-tama marilah kita panjatkan puji syukur kehadirat Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, karena dengan berkat dan karunia-Nya kita masih dapat mengikuti webinar di hari ini. Izinkan saya membacakan agenda webinar pada hari ini. Yang pertama adalah pembukaan, dilanjutkan dengan panel diskusi dan tanya jawab, dan yang terakhir adalah Bapak Ibu yang terhormat, gotong royong merupakan nilai mendasar masyarakat Indonesia yang perlu diwujudkan dalam berbagai aspek kehidupan masyarakat, termasuk dalam kegiatan wirausaha yang merupakan pilar perekonomian Indonesia. Kewirausahaan sosial serta kegiatan ekonomi yang berasaskan solidaritas sangat berperan dalam pembangunan yang inklusif dan berkelanjutan, baik dalam pemulihan pasca COVID-19 maupun pada kegiatan-kegiatan selanjutnya. Untuk mendukung terciptanya ekosistem kewirausahaan sosial, ILO bekerjasama dengan BAPPENAS, Kementerian Koperasi dan UMKM, ASEC, serta Trubus Bina Swadaya menyelenggarakan webinar nasional dengan tajuk Mewujudkan Kewirausahaan Nasional melalui Ekonomi Solidaritas Nasional. Bapak Ibu yang berbahagia, webinar ini menyediakan fitur alih bahasa secara simultan yang berada di sebelah kanan bawah layar dan dapat diakses menggunakan bahasa Indonesia serta bahasa Inggris. Kami informasikan pula kepada Bapak Ibu untuk mengisi daftar hadir yang akan dikirimkan melalui chatbox secara berkala, serta sertifikat akan dikirimkan melalui email Bapak Ibu yang Bapak Ibu gunakan untuk mendaftar, atau email yang Bapak Ibu isikan pada daftar hadir kami. Pertama-tama kami ucapkan selamat datang dan terima kasih kepada Ibu Michiko Miyamoto selaku Direktur ILO untuk Indonesia dan Timor Leste, Ibu Destrian Nasari selaku Asisten Deputi Konsultasi Bisnis dan Pendampingan Kementerian Koperasi dan UMKM, Ibu Simel Esim selaku Head of Cooperative Unit ILO Geneva, serta yang kami hormati, selamat datang dan terima kasih kepada Bapak Ibu panelis. Pertama ada Bapak Ahmad Dhani Gunadi selaku Direktur Pengembangan UMKM dan Koperasi BAPPENAS, lalu ada Trubus Bina Swadaya Foundation, lalu ada Bapak Jong Taeyeon selaku Chief Director of Korea Social Enterprise Promotion Agency. Selanjutnya ada Bapak Fuhan Tapi selaku Founder of Social Entrepreneur Development Association Malaysia, serta Ibu Ari Sutanti selaku Senior Program Manager British Council Indonesia. Tak lupa pula kami ucapkan selamat datang dan terima kasih kepada seluruh tamu undangan, baik dari instansi pemerintah, pendidikan, NGO, serta seluruh peserta webinar, baik yang berada di ruang Zoom maupun di platform YouTube. Bapak Ibu yang terhormat, mari kita lanjut ke sesi berikutnya, yaitu sesi pembukaan pada webinar hari ini. Mari kita simak bersama-sama sambutan dari Ibu Michiko Miyamoto selaku Direktur ILO untuk Indonesia dan Timor Leste. Ms. Michiko, I please you to give the opening remarks.
Thank you very much. Terima kasih Ibu MC. Selamat siang Bapak-Bapak dan Ibu-Ibu. Good afternoon to all of you. Yang terhormat, Ibu Desni Anasari, Assistant Deputy of Business Consultation and Coaching, Ministry of Cooperatives and Small and Medium Enterprises. Ibu Simel Esim, Head of Cooperative Unit from ILO Geneva. Dr. Ahmed Dadin Gunadi, MR, Director of PUKMK, BAPPENAS, representative from ministries, unions, employers, and civil society organizations. Greeting to all the panelists today from Korea Social Enterprise Promotion Agency, Social Entrepreneurs Development Association, Malaysia, Bina Swadaya, and British Council. Good afternoon again to all of you. Well, firstly, I'd like to start by wishing all of you participating today a good health and good spirit during the challenging time of COVID-19 crisis. We will continue to be united in spirit and get through this pandemic together. It is very good for me to be here this afternoon with you for the national webinar on supporting the National Enterprise Program through Social and Solidarity Economy, SSE. I understand that the term SSE, Social and Solidarity Economy, is somehow new to many of you, or many of us in Indonesia, but in reality, the concept is not new at all. It is the day-to-day practice here in our Indonesian community. Indeed, many fellow Indonesians or Indonesian communities are already practicing it day-to-day basis, gotong royong. The main principle of SSE, Social and Solidarity Economy, which basically means mutual assistance, mutual cooperation, helping each other, caring for society and environment, giving opportunities for others to make choices and making decisions to improve their lives. So social and solidarity economy concept do links to economic activities in general, but with a social and environmental cause, which you are already practicing in many parts of this country. The ILO does not have an official definition of social and solidarity economy, but a regional conference in Johannesburg in 2009 defined it as enterprises and organizations, in particular cooperatives, associations, and social enterprises that have specific features of producing goods and services and knowledge while pursuing both economic and social aims and fostering participation and solidarity. And the United Nations Task Force on Social and Solidarity Economy in 2014 also states that social and solidarity economy is characterized by organizations, enterprises, and networks that are diverse in nature but share common features in terms of development objectives, organizational forms, and values. Both definitions shared with you argue that the current economic models and economic system needs to be transformed to be more inclusive. This is, of course, in line with the mandate of ILO and many of your mandate, your institutions that you represent today, to build an economic system that is inclusive in growth, and especially in the context of post-pandemic situation, whereby all levels of societies were badly impacted. We often look at the alphabet. Is it going to be K-shaped recovery or is it going to be B-shaped recovery? In K-shaped recovery, only parts, if you picture the letter K, only part of the good group, stronger group will recover. But in B-shape, we recover it all together, bounce back all together, and we want the victory format. And ILO's recent research indicates that when we look at the SSE organizations, some organizations meet all the criteria as social and solidarity economy and enterprises, and some organizations may classify it as in between, hybrid, which means meeting some of those criteria. And the research also found that the government policy could play a significant facilitating role to promote the growth of social and solidarity economic organization and enterprises. In summary, key findings from the research show the greater need for policy coherence in support of cooperatives and also affirmative policies for the social and solidarity economy organizations and enterprises to grow. Given the potential magnitude, how these SSE organizations and enterprises can contribute to social, economic, and environmental objectives of the country, they need to be supported with greater recognition in public policy, enabling laws, and supporting programs. The process of legal and policy reform to enable social and solidarity economy should also include measures to establish a framework concerning credit, taxes, and training for SSE and enterprises. Social enterprises, which is growing rapidly in Indonesia, for example, could benefit from legal recognition and an effective certification system, which does not exist at present. We very much welcome government initiatives to create a more conducive environment for the operation of social and solidarity economy, in particular for social enterprises. ILO stands ready to support and work with you in drafting of the action plans and also the implementation of the presidential regulations on entrepreneurship. I look forward to learning the outcomes of this important webinar today and look forward to working closely with you on this subject after the webinar. Thank you very much. Terima kasih banyak.
Ibu Destriana Sari, selaku Asisten Deputi Konsultasi Bisnis dan Pendampingan Kementerian Koperasi dan UMKM. Pada Ibu Sari, waktu dan tempat kami persilahkan.
Terima kasih, Mbak Dalu. Yang saya hormati Ibu Michiko Miyamoto, Direktur ILO untuk Indonesia dan Timor Leste, Ibu Simel Esim, Head of Cooperative Unit ILO Geneva, Bapak Dr. Ahmad Dading Gunadi, Pak Direktur Pengembangan UMKM dan Koperasi BAPPENAS, Ibu Dr. Eri Trinurini Adi, Direktur dari Yayasan Bina Swadaya, Bapak Yong Tae-yun, Chief Director Korea Social Enterprise Promotion Agency, Bapak Puhan Pati, Founder Social Entrepreneur Development Association Malaysia, Ibu Ari Sutanti, Senior Program Manager British Council Indonesia, dan Bapak Ibu peserta webinar. Saya melihat tadi ada Ibu Nia Niscaya, Deputi Kementerian Pariwisata dan Ekonomi Kreatif, juga Bapak Ibu sekalian mewakili kementerian lembaga yang lain, perguruan tinggi, organisasi masyarakat, dan juga ada beberapa tamu dari luar negeri yang saya lihat di partisipan. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Selamat sore. Puji syukur kehadiran Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, kita bisa berkumpul hari ini secara virtual dalam keadaan sehat untuk mengikuti webinar nasional Mewujudkan Kewirausahaan Nasional melalui Ekonomi Solidaritas Sosial. UMKM memiliki peran penting bagi perekonomian nasional Indonesia sebanyak 64,2 juta, sekitar 99% merupakan usaha mikro dan berkontribusi terhadap PDB sebesar 61,07% dan investasi 60,42%, juga ekspor 14,37%. Namun pemerintah bermaksud menambah jumlah usaha kecil dan menengahnya karena untuk memperbaiki struktur ekonomi Indonesia untuk menjadi lebih kuat. Mayoritas usaha mikro adalah pelaku usaha yang muncul karena kebutuhan, terpaksa oleh keadaan, sehingga tidak memiliki jiwa kewirausahaan, sehingga tercipta kondisi produktivitas rendah, kemudian kurang inovasi, usaha tidak berkelanjutan dan sehingga kurang kompetitif di pasar global. Di tengah pandemi ini UMKM menjadi sektor yang sangat terdampak. Kondisi perekonomian Indonesia ini terkoreksi saat ingin meningkatkan rasio kewirausahaan, di mana target 2021 ini dari 3,47 rasio akan diharapkan naik menjadi 3,55 dan nanti akhirnya di 2024 mencapai 3,95. Di masa pandemi ini kondisinya tidak normal, sehingga tentu cara kita menyelesaikan permasalahan juga seharusnya juga berbeda, tidak seperti biasanya. Sehingga kolaborasi menjadi kunci untuk bersama-sama bangkit dari pandemi. Pemerintah menyusun rancangan peraturan Presiden pengembangan kewirausahaan nasional sekaligus turunan dari Undang-Undang Cipta Kerja dan PP 7 nomor 2021. Instrumen ini akan menjadi panduan kolaborasi 31 kementerian lembaga, dan salah satunya ada rencana aksi yang akan mendukung pencapaian target 3,95 sekitar 1.500.000 wirausaha baru yang diharapkan sudah dengan inovasi berkelanjutan dan akan menciptakan lapangan pekerjaan. Angka ini merupakan target yang harus dicapai cukup berat, sehingga kolaborasi menjadi satu-satunya cara agar bisa bekerja bersama mencapai outcome yang diharapkan. Bapak Ibu yang saya hormati, acara webinar nasional ini bertujuan untuk mensosialisasikan ekonomi solidaritas sosial yang sejalan dengan rancangan Perpres pengembangan kewirausahaan nasional, sehingga diharapkan bisa mengakomodir adanya wirausaha tematik, salah satunya wirausaha sosial, yaitu definisi yang ada di rancangan Perpres pengembangan kewirausahaan nasional adalah setiap orang yang memiliki jiwa sosial tinggi dan kemampuan bisnis yang sangat baik. Mereka mampu mengidentifikasi masalah sosial, melihatnya sebagai peluang, kemudian mampu memberikan solusi. Tujuan utama dari wirausaha sosial untuk membantu pemerintah menyelesaikan masalah sosial dengan mencapai minimal 1 tujuan pembangunan berkelanjutan atau SDGs. Kriteria dalam wirausaha sosial kami fokuskan untuk wirausaha innovation driven enterprise. Jadi bukan hanya sekedar small business owners. Dan diharapkan ketika berhasil bisa menginvestasikan kembali minimal 51% keuntungan bersihnya untuk satu misi sosial. Angka ini kami sudah gunakan mengacu pada standar internasional supaya kita bisa menyandingkan Indonesia dengan dunia internasional. Tentu diperlukan upaya bertahap dengan kolaborasi berbagai pihak untuk mencapainya. Pemerintah sangat mengapresiasi inisiasi berbagai pihak yang banyak bermunculan untuk membantu pemerintah menyelesaikan masalah sosial dan ekonomi. Banyak inisiasi wirausaha sosial yang akan dihubungkan sebagai off-taker atau pasar bagi pengembangan ekonomi masyarakat miskin, dan juga inisiasi penumbuhan wirausaha yang akan menyelesaikan masalah sosial dan lingkungan hidup. Bapak dan Ibu yang saya hormati, kegiatan hari ini kami harapkan dapat menjadi wadah berbagi informasi dan berdiskusi lebih dalam bagaimana konsep ekonomi solidaritas sosial dapat mendukung pengembangan kewirausahaan nasional, dan kita juga dapat belajar dari best practice yang sudah dilakukan negara. Saya sangat mengapresiasi kegiatan webinar nasional ini. Berterima kasih kepada ILO, BAPPENAS, Yayasan Bina Swadaya, ASEAN Social and Solidarity Economic Council atas kolaborasi pelaksanaan webinar kali ini. Semoga acara hari ini bermanfaat dan tidak berhenti di sini, akan berlanjut dengan kolaborasi langkah nyata menumbuhkan wirausaha sosial yang mandiri, inovatif, dan berkelanjutan. Terima kasih, salam sehat dan salam kolaborasi. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Pada Bapak Ibu hadirin, apabila ada pertanyaan, Bapak Ibu bisa kirimkan melalui kolom Q&A yang ada di bawah di sebelah kolom chat. Dan nanti akan kami bacakan beberapa pertanyaan ketika di sesi diskusi. Lanjut acara ini, yaitu paparan Global Movement on Social Solidarity Economy yang akan disampaikan oleh Ibu Simel Esim selaku Head of Cooperative Unit ILO. Ms. Simel, the time is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon and greetings from the ILO's Cooperatives Unit. I'm honored to join you from Geneva today for this webinar. Many thanks for extending this invitation. In the last decade, social and solidarity economy has been gaining popularity around the world. Having said that, important questions remain regarding its definition, measurement, size, impact, potential, and limits. As Michiko-san mentioned, there is not an official international agreed upon definition on social and solidarity economy, SSE. Michiko-san shared the working definition from an ILO regional conference in 2009. She also mentioned the definition used by the UN Task Force on the social and solidarity economy. Indeed, SSE is an umbrella term that encompasses a range of enterprises and organizations that have an explicit social and economic objective, and growingly and more recently also environmental ones. They also have some form of cooperative, associative, solidaristic relation, whether this is between workers, producers, or consumers. And they also practice some degree of workplace democracy and self-management. In most countries, cooperatives are the biggest building block under SSE. They are well established in Indonesia and many countries of the world. They have legislation, they exist in different sectors. They have support institutions and even to some extent statistics, but we can say more about that later. Traditionally, they exist in sectors that we know, like agriculture, finance, housing, retail, but increasingly there are new types of cooperatives that are emerging. These are worker cooperatives, social cooperatives, multi-stakeholder cooperatives. And also we see the cooperatives in new sectors like technology, renewable energy, working with refugees, or in providing health and care services. And aligned with these emerging forms, laws and policies around cooperatives are also being updated to capture this growing diversity. What are some of the other types of organizations and enterprises that fall under SSE? These can include enterprises and organizations such as mutuals, that are in health sector, insurance sector, foundations, social enterprises, women's self-help groups, membership-based associations of informal economy workers, community forestry groups, ethical and cooperative banks, credit unions, and other alternative finance schemes. The scope and nature, of course, of SSE changes from country to country and region to region. For instance, SSE as an umbrella term is very well recognized in continental Europe, in Francophone countries, in Latin America, and it is slightly less familiar in the Asia-Pacific region. Having said that, and as Michiko-san also mentioned, many of the types of organizations, the values, the associated principles under social and solidarity economy already exist traditionally in many of our societies, like in Indonesia, and quite prominent. The brief on Indonesia, SSE in Indonesia, that's being shared with you for this event is based on Dr. Erin's work, and it documents both some of these traditional and emerging SSE enterprises and organizations. At this point, you may say, why do we need an umbrella framework like SSE? Well, in the last decade, there have been growing calls for the need to rethink development. And in the context of the COVID crisis, we are seeing that the way we do business as usual has not managed to prevent, and some may argue have even in some instances contributed to recent crises of public health, food insecurity, climate injustice, and rising inequalities. This means we need to look more closely at how we organize and what are some of the business models around these problems, and that puts people and planet along with profits at the center of their operations, and that have some form of cooperation, mutualism, and solidarity that can fill the gaps, especially when either public or private sector is not able to or willing to step in or complement them in the process. And there is growing recognition that these kind of strategies need to be supported. What would an umbrella framework like SSE do? It can help with us thinking in a more cohesive manner about an enabling environment of policies and programs. For instance, when you are discussing the National Entrepreneurship Program, for it to be inclusive of diverse range of enterprises, including these new and emerging types, because this is important for improving resilience. If you have one type of enterprise in the face of systemic shock, it's going to have the same type of spiraling downward effect. But if you have diversity type of enterprises, then they will have different strengths to be able to persevere in the face of challenge. Having a more cohesive SSE framework can also help build a harmonious ecosystem of support institutions for these different business models and organizations to coexist, creating a system of interconnectedness to cooperate and overcome the challenges to sustainability and scale. Policy frameworks on social and solidarity economy are being adopted around the world, from France, Portugal, Ecuador, Spain, Mexico, Djibouti, Cameroon, Quebec, and ILO has been supporting South African constituents and co-op and SSE movements and Tunisian ones in developing SSE policies. Also, departments and ministries are being established around not only cooperatives, but expanding to include SSE. ILO research shows that historically, during periods of crises, the value of cooperation, solidarity, and mutualism experienced an increase in popularity, and this was the case like we saw during the global financial crisis in 2007 and 8, and it is similar around COVID-19. Since the global pandemic have started, SSE organizations and enterprises have stepped up to support members and communities, and they have even been recognized by governments as partners in emergency response, especially on the social front. For instance, during the pandemic, producer and consumer cooperatives and associations have kept the supply of essential foods and goods moving, while also relocalizing production where some of the supply chains were severed internationally. And they were essential to food security during this period. Credit unions, ethical banks, financial cooperatives have put initiatives in place to support MSMEs and users strapped for cash and struggling to pay their loans. Many governments, again, recognize them as partners, including them in financial relief teams. Co-ops and associations, social enterprises in the health and industrial sectors transformed products and services to meet local needs for protective equipment and social care, keeping the work flowing to the workers and also providing these much needed supplies and services. Membership-based associations of informal economy workers, such as those among waste pickers, home-based workers, street vendors have been providing assistance to their members or orienting them for their preparedness in the face of the crisis and advocating with governments to support their members whose day-to-day livelihoods are severe with the lockdowns. What does the ILO have to do with SSE enterprises and organizations, you may ask? The ILO has been working on the cooperative enterprises for more than 100 years. And in the last decade, it has also been supporting SSE through research, policy advisory, and development cooperation projects and capacity building initiatives. The ILO research shows that SSE enterprises and organizations play a number of roles in their local communities, from generating employment, improving livelihoods, practicing economic democracy, and advancing the negotiation power and collective voice among rural, informal economy workers and vulnerable populations who can face social exclusion, like indigenous people, LGBT communities, and people with disabilities. The ILO's Co-op unit, which is responsible for Co-op and SSE, has been around since 1920, and it's also been on the forefront of promoting Co-op and SSE in the United Nations system. ILO is a co-founder of the Committee on the Promotion and Advancement of Cooperatives, which is International Cooperative Alliance, and 4 other UN agencies as members. ILO also co-founded the UN Task Force on Social and Solidarity Economy that was mentioned by Michika-san, and it's been chairing it since 2014. This task force has 19 UN agencies and 10 civil society organizations as observers. There is also calls for a UN resolution on SSE that may be coming up as early as the next UN General Assembly in 2022. The growing interest in SSE is reflected in recent texts adopted by the ILO's tripartite constituents, namely the governments, employers, and workers' organizations. What are some of these texts? ILO Centenary Declaration for the Future of Work, adopted in 2019, calls for promoting and enabling environment for sustainable enterprises, including cooperatives and the wider social and solidarity economy. The global call to action adopted at the International Labour Conference this year outlines measures to create a human-centered recovery from the pandemic, and it mentions the need for inclusive economic growth and employment, recognizing the role of private and public sectors and the social and solidarity economy. In March this year, the ILO's governing body decided to put place on the agenda of next year's International Labour Conference a general discussion on social and solidarity economy for a human-centered future of work. This is not a standard-setting discussion, it's a general discussion, although based on the dialogue that takes place among the constituents, they may advise for moving toward a standard. ILO has a recommendation for the promotion of cooperatives from 2002, so next year we will be celebrating its 20th anniversary, and in more than 110 countries have used that recommendation, including Indonesia, in informing and guiding the reform of their cooperative legislation and policies. Next year is the first time SSE is discussed at the ILO, and we are preparing a report to inform that discussion, which will be available in March next year. And if you ask what will the committee be discussing, we hope that there will be a universal definition of the term social and solidarity economy, including its associated principles and values. Provide an assessment of the contribution of SSE to help people manage the transitions in their working lives, including, for instance, from the informal to the formal economy, and provide policy guidance for member states wishing to establish a conducive, enabling environment for developing SSE. This general discussion is an opportunity for cooperative movement and wider SSE organizations in Indonesia and around the globe to advocate with their governments and engage with workers and employers organizations in their countries to ensure that the wide scope and great potential of SSE is well understood and reflected in the ILC discussion next year. I thank you and wish you fruitful deliberations. Back to you.
Thank you, Miss Imel. Selanjutnya, dimohon untuk Bapak Ibu menyalakan kamera dan kita akan foto bersama sejenak. Nah, hitungan 3, 1, 2, 3. Sekali lagi, saya cheers. 1, 2, 3. Thank you. Ya, Bapak Ibu hadirin yang terhormat, wirausaha sosial merupakan salah satu aspek yang berperan penting untuk pemulihan pasca pandemi. Lalu, bagaimana cara menumbuhkan ekosistem wirausaha sosial? Mari kita simak pada sesi panel diskusi dan tanya jawab yang akan dipandu oleh Bapak Tendi Gunawan sebagai moderator. Saat ini Bapak Tendi Gunawan menjabat sebagai Program Officer di ILO Indonesia. Tanpa berlama-lama lagi, mari kita simak sesi panel diskusi dengan panelis yang pastinya profesional di bidang kewirausahaan. Pada Bapak Tendi, waktu dan tempat kami persilakan.
Terima kasih banyak Bu Galuh. Bapak Ibu sekalian, pada hari ini kita kehadiran 5 pembicara yang tentu saja akan sangat luar biasa diskusinya. Yang pertama saya mau menyapa Bapak Ahmad Dading dari BAPPENAS. Selamat siang Pak. Selamat siang Pak Dading. Pak Dading sudah menjabat sebagai Direktur PUMKA di BAPPENAS sejak tahun 2017 dan juga menjabat berbagai posisi penting di BAPPENAS sejak tahun 93 ya Pak. Terima kasih. Yang kedua saya mau menyapa Ibu Eri. Halo, selamat siang Ibu Eri.
Ya, selamat siang. Terima kasih.
Ibu Eri saat ini, siapa nggak kenal Bu Eri ya begitu, ini board membernya Bina Swadaya, sangat senior, dan juga board member dari ASEC Solidarity Economy Council. Ibu Eri juga yang membuat mapping tadi yang disebut Ibu Simel Esim untuk landscape mengenai organisasi, mengenai SSI. Tadi bisa diambil di chat box Bapak Ibu sekalian pada tahun 2019 tadinya ya. Nanti Ibu Eri juga akan sharing sedikit mengenai studinya. Yang ketiga ada Mr. Jong Tae-yun, Chief Director di Korea Social Enterprise Promotion Agency. Sayang sekali Mr. Tae-yun tidak bisa hadir daring pada hari ini, tetapi nanti beliau ada videonya. Yang keempat, Mr. Kuhan Pati. Good afternoon, Pak Kuhan Pati. Good afternoon. Pak Kuhan Pati is the founder of Masalah Wheels and Digital Social, yang merupakan usaha sosial yang mendapatkan banyak sekali penghargaan di Malaysia. Juga pernah mendapatkan penghargaan Social Entrepreneur of the Year pada tahun 2019, Prestige 40 Under 40 2019, masih muda Pak, dan Top 10 Most Innovative Young Leaders 2016. Nanti beliau akan sharing mengenai bagaimana mengakreditasi usaha sosial di Malaysia yang mungkin nanti bisa kita pelajari ya Bapak Ibu sekalian. Yang terakhir, tapi last but not least, Ibu Ari Sutanti. Selamat siang Ibu Ari. Ibu Ari Sutanti.
Selamat siang Pak Tendi.
Selamat siang Bu Ari.
Halo Pak Dading, Pak Bu Eri, dan Pak
Udah pada kenal.
Halo Pak Dading.
Ibu Ari saat ini Senior Program Manager di British Council Indonesia dan juga pengalamannya sangat intensif mengenai usaha sosial, startup, inovatif sosial, inovator sosial, dan pengembangan masyarakat. Ibu Ari juga pernah menjabat sebagai Social Development Specialist ya Bu di World Bank. Oke, terima kasih. Luar biasa sekali panel pada hari ini. untuk tanpa menunda lagi, mungkin kita bisa masuk pada mengenai polisinya dulu ya, dengan Pak Dading. Pak Dading ada presentasi yang untuk di-share mengenai kerangka kebijakan kewirausahaan nasional. Gimana sih sekarang nih tentang kewirausahaan nasional? Silakan, waktunya 10 menit Pak Dading. Mas Chandra bisa bantu share presentasinya Pak Dading?
Baik, terima kasih banyak Pak Tendi yang saya hormati dari ILO, Miss Michiko, dan juga Miss Simel Esim. Terima kasih juga atas undangannya dan juga kerjasama dengan Bina Swadaya.